Good morning, church. It's Pastor Mike. This morning, as a devotion, I wanted to share a scripture that I'm sure you know pretty well, one that most Christians and people of faith can recall and recite, and it's Psalm 139. The image of Psalm 139 is so well known because it's captivating and beautiful. It's this litany of the ways that God knows us and that God is with us, and we can't escape God's knowledge or God's presence with us no matter what's going on in the world. In Psalm 139, the psalmist writes, "Where can I go from your spirit?" Talking to God. "If I go up to the heavens, you're there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there, your hand guides me." That God is always with us. And He's not just always with us, but He knows us. This is the psalm that famously says that you created me, God. In my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. Before I'd lived a single day, you had them all written out in your book of life. God knows us. He knows our inmost thoughts. He knows where we are. He knows who we are intimately. And we can sit in that truth and feel the presence of God and the power of God with us in every moment, because no matter what has happened, God is there. But we can also go one step further and say, what is our response to this ever present, all knowing God? What do we do? Because it's not enough just to be known by God. We also must seek to know God. And that's what the psalmist does for all of this psalm, talking about what God knows. At the end, it shifts, and it shifts to what we think and what we aspire to know. Listen to the psalmist in verse 17. He says, "How precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of the sand. And when I awake, I am still with you." The perspective shifts, and it's no longer about what God knows, but what about we seek to know. It's not just that God's with us, but that we wake up and we are with God too. That we find our presence and seek our presence to be with God, and not just assume that He must be with us, so why think about it or work too hard? In our Christian faith, it is necessary and imperative that we seek God's presence just as much as He seeks ours. God is always there when we look to Him and when we call on Him. But we have to take some step, some effort, some energy to seek God around us, to look for God, to call out to God, and to know God's thoughts. Because it is when we are in that dialogue with God, God knowing us and us knowing God, that's prayer. That's where the transformation happens. That's where we become more than just ourselves. But God's Spirit lives within us and calls out and transforms us into the image of His Son. So my prayer for you today is that not just that you would be known by God, but that you would know God today, that you would seek His presence and His power today, that you would be comforted when you hurt, that you would be convicted when you sin, that you would be kept in the loving arms and in the will of the God who will never forsake you. So God bless you today. Find your hope in His hope, and find your strength in His strength.